cold case killings in modern American history. And this morning, the man known as Keefe D is breaking his...
A newly leaked FBI audio mentions Tupac, and the agent's panic is clear in every word. The clip is short, but its impact is massive, raising questions that have never been answered. What secrets does this audio hold, and why does Tupac's name still make people so uneasy after all these years? Join us to find out. The leak that was never meant to be heard.
Presenting a competing narrative and a more truthful narrative concerning those events of September. Our client...
It started quietly, almost like nothing important had happened. A short audio clip appeared online and spread fast before anyone could slow it down. At first, people thought it was fake or just another old rumor dressed up to get clicks. But within minutes, something felt different. The voices sounded tense, the timing felt wrong. And most stunning of all, the name Tupac came up in a way that did not sound planned or safe. This was not a clean statement or a public release. It felt like people talking when they thought no one was listening. What made the situation explode was not just the mention of Tupac, but the tone behind it. The voices did not sound calm or confident. They sounded worried, rushed, and unsure. Listeners noticed pauses, lowered voices, and sudden changes in speech, the kind that happen when people realize they may have said too much. That alone made many believe this was never meant for the public. The internet did what it always does. It replayed every second, slowed it down, and shared it everywhere. As the clip moved across platforms, former investigators, journalists, and longtime Tupac followers began reacting. Some said the way the speakers talked suggested internal fear, not media drama. Others noticed references that seemed to point to files, timelines, and details that were never fully explained before. Nothing was clear, but everything felt heavy. The clip did not explain anything directly. Instead, it opened a door that many thought had been locked forever.
From his home, Kana Whitworth has the latest on the investigation, unsolved for nearly 3 decades.
For decades, Tupac's story has been surrounded by confusion, missing pieces, and unanswered questions. Many people accepted that the full truth might never come out. Over time, interest faded, and official silence became normal. That is why this audio hit so hard. It did not sound like history being remembered. It sounded like something unfinished, something still sensitive, something that could cause problems if pushed too far. What truly pulled people in was the reaction that followed. Shortly after the clip spread, posts disappeared, accounts went quiet, and some pages that shared the audio removed it without explanation. This only added fuel to the fire. When information vanishes instead of being denied, people start asking why. If it meant nothing, why rush to erase it? That question sat heavy in the minds of listeners. Many noticed that the audio did not focus on the past alone. There were hints that certain decisions, delays, or choices made years ago were still being protected. That idea shook people. It suggested that Tupac's name still carries weight in places far from music and culture. It hinted that the story may not be as closed as everyone was told. What makes this moment so powerful is how it feels personal. Tupac was more than an artist. He was a voice, a symbol, and for many, a truth teller. Hearing his name spoken with caution and fear so many years later stirs emotion. It reminds people that some stories refuse to stay buried, no matter how much time passes. As listeners replayed the clip, one feeling became common. This was not the end of a story. It felt like the beginning of something new. The audio did not give answers, but it raised the kind of questions that demand attention. Why now? Why the panic? And what happens if more pieces come out? Just when it seemed like this was only a strange moment that would fade, signs began to appear that this was only part 1. Whispers of other recordings, linked files, and old decisions started circulating. And that is where things take a deeper turn, because if this was only a small leak, then the next section might reveal why certain people are suddenly afraid of what comes next. FBI agents caught in a moment of panic. What followed after the first audio spread was even more unsettling. People expected a clear response or a firm denial, but that never came. Instead, there was silence, the kind that feels loud. That silence made many believe the situation was being handled behind closed doors. When officials avoid speaking, it often means they are choosing their next move carefully. And in this case, the careful behavior made the public feel that something sensitive had been touched. Soon, online researchers began connecting dots. Old reports were pulled back into the spotlight. Timelines that once felt settled were questioned again. Some listeners pointed out how certain moments in the audio matched long-standing rumors that were always brushed aside. Others noticed that parts of Tupac's case seemed to stop suddenly in the past, as if someone had decided not to go further. The audio did not explain why, but it made those old pauses feel intentional.
Of Dwayne Davis, known as Keefe D, just miles away from where Tupac was gunned down.
What really caught attention was the idea that fear was present. Fear does not come from random noise. It comes from risk. The voices in the clip sounded like people realizing that something protected might be slipping out. That feeling alone pushed the story forward. If nothing important was at stake, there would be no reason to sound alarmed. As the days passed, some insiders hinted that this audio was not alone. It was rumored to be part of a longer recording, possibly linked to routine internal communication that was never meant to leave official systems. If true, that would mean this was not a planned leak, but an accident. And accidents are dangerous because they are honest. They catch people before they can shape the message. This reopened a painful truth for many fans. Tupac's case was never just about one night. It was about power, silence, and stories that never lined up. Over time, people learned to live with uncertainty. But uncertainty becomes harder to accept when new cracks appear. The audio did not rewrite history, but it reminded everyone that history may have been edited. Emotion began to drive the conversation. For older fans, it felt like being pulled back into a moment they never got closure from. For younger listeners, it felt like discovering that something they were taught to accept might not be complete. That emotional mix gave the story strength. It stopped being just news and became personal again. Behind the scenes, the reaction seemed controlled but tense. No open statements, no clear explanations, just quiet adjustments. Some observers believe this is done to prevent panic, while others think it is meant to slow curiosity. But curiosity rarely slows when people feel they are being kept out. What makes this stage of the story important is that it shifts focus. The question is no longer only about Tupac. It is about trust. Can the public trust that everything important was shared? Or were some truths placed away for convenience? The leaked audio did not accuse anyone directly, but it planted doubt. And doubt grows fast when it is ignored. As attention kept rising, one thought stayed in people's minds. If a small clip could cause this much tension, then the full picture must be far bigger. And if others exist who know more, they may now feel pressure they did not expect. Pressure makes people act. Sometimes it makes them speak. That is why this moment feels unstable. It sits between what we know and what might come out next. The audio may have been brief, but its impact was deep. And as whispers of hidden files and unfinished work continue to spread, the story begins to lean toward one uncomfortable idea. Someone, somewhere, knows more than they have ever said, and the next reveal could finally explain why Tupac's name still makes people nervous all these years later. Tupac's name suddenly appears in the audio. As the tension grew, a deeper layer of the story slowly came into view. People began to realize that this was not only about one leaked moment, but about a long chain of choices made quietly over many years. The audio acted like a spark, lighting up areas that had been kept dark on purpose. Once light appears, it becomes hard to ignore what was hidden. Many started asking how a name like Tupac could still trigger concern after so much time. He was gone. The case was labeled closed by many, and the world had moved on. Yet the reaction around the audio suggested the opposite. It felt like a reminder that some stories do not age the way others do. Instead of fading, they sit still, waiting for the right moment to breathe again. People who studied the clip closely noticed something important. The fear did not sound emotional. It sounded professional, the kind that comes from rules being broken or lines being crossed. That detail changed how the leak was seen. This was not gossip or careless talk. It sounded like people realizing that a boundary had been passed, and boundaries exist for a reason. As conversations spread, attention turned to old documents and moments that once felt unimportant. Small details that were ignored before now seemed louder. Why certain leads stopped suddenly. Why some names were never followed up. Why silence became the final answer instead of clarity. The leaked audio did not answer these questions, but it made people brave enough to ask them again.
I have no evidence against me. Came and put me in Las Vegas.
61-year-old Dwayne Keefe D. Davis says the night of the murder, September 7, 1996.
What made everything feel heavier was the timing. This did not happen during an anniversary or a major event. It appeared randomly, without warning. That randomness made it feel real. Planned releases come with explanations. Accidents come with panic. And panic was exactly what people heard. Some believe the fear comes from unfinished business. Others think it comes from protecting old decisions that cannot survive public review. Either way, the idea that the truth might be layered instead of simple changed how people looked at the past. It suggested that what the public knows may only be a surface version, cleaned and trimmed to fit a story that felt easier to accept. For fans, this reopened emotional wounds. Tupac represented honesty, pain, and resistance. He spoke loudly when others stayed quiet. The thought that his story might have been handled with caution instead of courage hurt deeply. It made people wonder if the system he criticized so often still struggles with the same problems today. There was also fear on the other side, fear of what happens when trust breaks. Once people believe that important details were hidden, every official answer becomes weaker. Silence starts to sound like avoidance, and calm statements feel rehearsed. The leaked audio disrupted control, and control is something institutions rely on to maintain order. Behind all this noise, one idea stood out. Someone, somewhere, did not expect this to surface. And when people are caught off guard, they reveal their true concerns. The audio revealed concern, not confidence. That alone changed the balance of the story. As attention kept rising, the internet began doing what it does best. It preserved everything. Even removed clips were saved. Even deleted posts were remembered. In the digital world, nothing truly disappears. This meant that even if no more audio surfaced, the damage was already done. The question was no longer whether the clip was real, but why it caused such a reaction. Some observers believe this moment could lead to nothing more than discussion. Others believe it could push someone to speak. History shows that pressure often cracks silence. When enough people start asking the same question, answers eventually slip out. Not always in big announcements, but in small, careful moves. This stage of the story feels like standing at a door that has been unlocked but not yet opened. The air feels different, the past feels closer, and the people who once felt safe behind time now seem unsure. Tupac's name, once again, carries weight beyond music. It carries an unfinished truth. What happens next depends on courage. Courage to admit mistakes, courage to explain decisions, courage to let the full story exist, even if it is uncomfortable. The leaked audio may have been short, but it has already done something powerful. It reminded everyone that silence is not the same as closure. As more eyes stay fixed on this story, one thing becomes clear. This is no longer about curiosity alone. It is about accountability. And when accountability enters the room, the past no longer stays quiet. It speaks, slowly at first, then louder with every moment it is ignored. Now the tension hangs in the air. If this much fear came from a single clip, then the truth behind it must be larger. And if someone decides to let that truth out fully, the impact could reach far beyond one case. It could change how people view history, power, and the cost of staying silent for too long. The file the public was never supposed to know about. As the story continued to grow, a new kind of tension entered the space. It was no longer loud or rushed. It became slow and heavy, like everyone was waiting for something to drop. People noticed how carefully words were being chosen whenever the topic came up. That carefulness spoke volumes. When people are free, they speak easily. When they are afraid, they pause. And those pauses became just as important as the leaked audio itself. The public began to realize that this situation touched more than one moment in time. It felt connected to choices made years ago, choices that were meant to stay buried under paperwork and silence. Time usually protects secrets, but sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes time weakens the walls built around the truth, and once a crack appears, pressure does the rest. Many started revisiting Tupac's final years with a new lens. His movements, his words, his conflicts, and his warnings felt different now. Things that once sounded poetic or emotional began to feel serious and intentional. Some fans wondered if he knew more than people believed. Others questioned whether his voice made certain people uncomfortable even before his death. That discomfort may explain why his name still causes unease today. What made this stage unsettling was the sense that people inside the system were reacting, not explaining. Small adjustments, quiet reshuffling, and subtle distance from the topic became noticeable. These are not actions taken when nothing is wrong. They are signs of preparation. Preparation for questions, for exposure, or for responsibility. At the same time, independent researchers and longtime followers began working quietly. They compared notes, timelines, and public records, not to accuse, but to understand. And what they found was not a clear answer, but a pattern of avoidance. Certain paths were started and then suddenly dropped. Certain details were acknowledged and then never mentioned again. Patterns do not prove guilt, but they do raise concern. Emotion continued to drive the story forward. For many, this was not about conspiracy or shock. It was about respect. Tupac meant something to people. He spoke for pain that many could not express. The idea that his story might have been simplified for convenience felt unfair. It made people feel like something sacred had been handled carelessly. There was also growing awareness that institutions fear embarrassment as much as failure. Admitting mistakes from the past can shake trust in the present. That fear often leads to silence, but silence has a cost. It invites imagination, and imagination grows faster than facts when facts are withheld. This section of the story feels like a quiet standoff. On one side, the public wants honesty. On the other, there is hesitation. Not denial, not correction, just hesitation. That space between the two keeps widening, and the wider it gets, the harder it becomes to close. What makes everything feel fragile is that one voice could change the direction completely. One person deciding to explain, to clarify, or to admit could turn confusion into understanding. But that choice carries risk. Speaking breaks protection, and protection is hard to give up once you have relied on it for years. As days passed, the energy around the story did not fade. It matured. It became more focused, more serious. People stopped chasing shock and started demanding clarity. That shift matters. Shock disappears quickly, but purpose does not. Tupac's legacy sits at the center of this tension. He challenged systems, called out injustice, and spoke truth without fear. The irony that his own story may still be trapped behind fear is not lost on anyone. It feels like an unfinished conversation waiting to be completed. This moment is not explosive, but it is powerful. It is the kind of moment that builds quietly until something gives. Whether that something is information, accountability, or acceptance remains unknown. But what is clear is that the ground has shifted. The leaked audio may never be fully explained, or it may become the key that opens everything else. Either way, it has already changed the tone of the conversation. It reminded people that history is written by choices, and choices can always be revisited. As the pressure continues to rise, one truth becomes harder to ignore. Stories do not disappear just because time passes. They wait, and when they return, they do so with purpose. Tupac's name returning in this way feels intentional, almost symbolic, a reminder that some voices are too powerful to silence forever. Now the story stands at another edge. The public is watching closely. Those involved are moving carefully, and the next step, whether loud or quiet, will decide how this chapter is remembered. Not as rumor, not as drama, but as a test of whether truth is finally ready to step forward. Why this recording is resurfacing right now. As attention stayed fixed on the story, a deeper feeling began to spread, one that went beyond curiosity or shock. It felt like awareness. People were no longer just listening to a leaked moment. They were sensing a shift in how the past was being viewed, and how much trust still existed between the public and those who guard information. This was no longer about one clip. It was about what happens when control slips, even briefly. Many started to notice how carefully official language was being used whenever related topics came up. Words were softened, details were avoided, conversations ended quickly. That careful behavior stood out. When something is truly settled, it is explained once and left alone. But when something is sensitive, it is handled like glass. Every movement is slow, every word measured. That difference did not go unnoticed. At the same time, Tupac's image began to feel closer, more human, and more unresolved. His interviews, lyrics, and public moments were revisited with fresh eyes. People noticed how often he spoke about truth being delayed, not denied. How he warned that systems protect themselves first. Those old words now felt less like art and more like prediction. It made people uncomfortable in a quiet way. What strengthened this section of the story was patience. No big reveal followed, no dramatic announcement, just waiting. And waiting has power. It allows people to think, to connect, to feel. The longer the silence lasted, the louder the unanswered questions became. Silence, in this case, was not calming. It was heavy. Some began to wonder if the fear heard in the audio came from the past catching up. Decisions made under pressure. Choices justified in the moment. Actions that seemed harmless years ago, but now feel risky under modern eyes. Time changes standards. What once felt acceptable can later feel wrong, and revisiting those moments can be frightening. This led to a deeper conversation about responsibility. Not blame, but responsibility. Responsibility to explain. Responsibility to acknowledge uncertainty. Responsibility to respect a life that mattered to millions. Tupac was not just a case file or a headline. He was a voice for people who felt unheard. Ignoring questions around his story felt like ignoring them too. As discussions grew more thoughtful, the tone shifted again. People stopped expecting instant answers. Instead, they began to demand honesty, even if it came slowly. That demand is harder to manage than outrage. Outrage fades. Honesty requires effort, humility, and risk. Behind the scenes, pressure continued to build. Not loud pressure, but steady pressure. The kind that comes from being watched closely. From knowing that any small move could be examined. That kind of pressure changes behavior. It forces preparation. And preparation suggests expectation. What made this moment powerful was that it did not rely on proof alone. It relied on feeling, on intuition. In the sense that something important was being protected, not explained. Humans are good at sensing that difference. And once that feeling settles in, it rarely goes away. Tupac's story has always carried weight because it sits at the crossroads of art, truth, and struggle. This new chapter adds another layer. It asks whether the systems he spoke against have truly changed, or if they still fear exposure. That question is uncomfortable, but necessary. As days turned into weeks, the story refused to disappear. It slowed, but it stayed. Like a song stuck in the background, always present, always reminding. The leaked audio became less important than its effect. It made people listen differently, trust differently, remember differently. This section of the story feels like the calm before a decision. Not necessarily a reveal, but a choice. A choice to speak or stay quiet, to explain or deflect, to close the chapter honestly, or let it linger forever. And choices, once made, shape legacy. What comes next depends on courage from unexpected places. Sometimes truth does not come from institutions, but from individuals. From people who grow tired of carrying weight that was never theirs alone. From those who realize that silence protects no one forever. As the tension continues to stretch, one idea becomes clearer. Tupac's name still holds power because his story is not finished. Not in facts, but in meaning. And meaning has a way of resurfacing when ignored for too long. Now the story stands at another turning point. The questions are sharper, the audience is more patient, and the silence is thinner than before. Whatever happens next, whether spoken loudly or quietly revealed, will not be received the same way as before. Because people are listening now, and they are listening closely. The dangerous questions this leak reopens. As the story moved forward, something subtle but powerful began to happen. The fear that once felt distant started to feel close, almost personal. People were no longer watching from the outside. They felt involved. The leaked audio had created a shared moment, one where listeners felt like they had stepped into a room they were never meant to enter. And once inside, it was hard to pretend nothing mattered. The reaction around Tupac's name continued to stand out. His presence in the conversation was treated carefully, almost gently, as if even speaking about him required caution. That kind of behavior does not come from history alone. It comes from impact. Tupac still represents unfinished business, not just for fans, but for systems that prefer clean endings. Clean endings are easy, complicated truths are not. As more time passed, people began to realize that the tension was not fading because it could not. It had nowhere to go. Without answers, emotion filled the space. Some felt anger, others felt sadness. Many felt tired of waiting. But above all, there was a growing sense of expectation. Expectation that someone, somewhere, would eventually have to respond in a meaningful way. This stage of the story feels like pressure building under the surface. Not loud, not chaotic, but steady. The kind of pressure that comes from being observed closely. Every silence was noticed, and every change questioned. So, when attention does not drift, it forces accountability, even without words. Tupac's legacy adds weight to that pressure. He challenged authority openly. He questioned systems that demanded silence. It feels symbolic that his name is now tied to a moment defined by silence and fear. That irony has not been lost on anyone. It makes the situation feel larger than one case or one clip. It feels like a test of honesty. Some people believe the truth is already known by a few and hidden from many. Others believe the truth is incomplete, trapped in forgotten files and half-finished investigations. Both ideas point to the same feeling. Something was left unresolved. And unresolved things do not stay quiet forever. The longer the story continues without explanation, the more control shifts away from those who once had it. Public trust is fragile. Once it cracks, it does not heal easily. Silence might protect the present, but it damages the future. People remember how moments like this are handled. What makes this section important is that it is not dramatic on the surface. There are no shocking reveals here. Instead, there is reflection. Reflection changes people. It changes how they listen, how they question, how they remember. That shift is powerful because it lasts longer than shock ever could. Behind closed doors, it is easy to imagine conversations becoming harder, decisions becoming heavier, not because of guilt, but because of responsibility. Responsibility to history, responsibility to truth, responsibility to a life that meant something to millions. As the public waits, patience becomes its own form of pressure. Calm attention is harder to dismiss than outrage. Calm attention does not fade quickly. It sits, it watches, it waits, and waiting forces movement eventually. Tupac's story has always been about more than music. It has been about voice, struggle, and truth. This new moment adds another layer. It asks whether truth can still be delayed or whether time has finally caught up. Time changes everything, even silence. This section feels like standing in the quiet before a storm, not knowing if rain will fall or pass by. But the air feels different, charged, heavy, full of possibility. That feeling alone tells us that the story is far from over. What happens next may not arrive loudly. It may come through small admissions, subtle shifts, or unexpected sources. But whatever form it takes, it will land on an audience that is ready. Ready to listen, ready to understand, ready to question, and that readiness changes everything. Because once people are ready, truth has less space to hide. It begins to surface, piece by piece, carried by time, pressure, and memory. Tupac's name returning in this way feels less like coincidence and more like a reminder. A reminder that stories tied to truth do not disappear. They wait, they breathe, and when the moment is right, they ask to be finished. This moment feels closer to that ending than ever before. Whether the ending brings clarity or deeper questions, one thing feels certain now: the story has crossed a line, and it will not return to silence again, no matter how carefully it is handled. So, what do you think about this leaked FBI audio and the fear around Tupac's name? Was it a harmless mistake, or proof that the truth still hurts? Let this moment remind us that silence is powerful too. Share your thoughts below, and keep questioning the stories we're told forever.